Good morning. I'm about to give you the first chapter in the new novel, Thicker Than Water. This book isn't being released until the 7th of October, but I'm going to read the first chapter to you now. And in line with one of my previous podcasts that says it ain't perfect, but it's good enough, I know that this won't be perfect as a reading, but I hope it will be good enough. So bear with me as a novice recorder of an audiobook in its first chapter, and I hope you enjoy. Chapter 1. Ruth. Most people can remember where they were or what they were doing when a momentous world event occurred. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated back in 1963, my grandparents were having a pie and a pint in their local pub after doing some early Christmas shopping. When the death of Princess Diana in a Paris car crash exploded all over the news, my parents were on a cheap late summer package holiday in Tenerife. When the world learned about the 9/11 catastrophe at the Twin Towers in New York, I'd just gone back to school after popping home for lunch. And, while my sister was being murdered, I was at the cinema. As some twisted, sick psycho was choking the last of the life from my poor, lovely but long-lost Rebecca, I was sipping Coke and crunching popcorn, and laughing at something silly on the silver screen. I don't even remember now what it was. Some stupid joke that Gina and I found funny. I always switch my phone off when I go to the cinema. I'm not one of those people who feels forced to stay connected to the outside world when I'm doing something that doesn't involve it. I don't find it hard at all to keep away from my social media accounts for more than 5 minutes in case I miss the fact that someone's posted a picture of their boring breakfast or, God forbid, commented on something I've said myself. I prefer to switch off entirely and be disengaged from everything but the movie. I've never seen the point in paying decent money to see something and then not giving it my full attention. So it was only later, as we were coming out, that I turned my phone back on and saw 2 missed calls from Rebecca. No messages, just 2 missed calls, 14 minutes apart. Did I ring her back? No. When the detectives asked me why I didn't return Rebecca's calls that she made to me around an hour before she was strangled, I invited them to consider a certain scenario. I asked them to picture a member of their immediate family who despised them and everything they stood for, who never missed an opportunity and sometimes actually created one, to torment them with phone calls, voice and email messages, and slanging matches in public places. Then I asked them both, if that person had called you twice, randomly, out of the blue, as so often happens when they're blind drunk or raging and wanting to unleash yet another tirade upon you, would you have rung them back? They regarded me impassively at first, with faces like stone. Then, predictably, like heat-seeking missiles, they homed in on the family rift. That's always the first logical angle to go at things from, of course, when there's been a murder. As I understand it, most murders are committed by family members or close friends. It makes perfect sense, I suppose. If you love someone enough, they can probably sometimes make you mad enough to want to kill them. But while Rebecca never failed to upset me, cause me to lose my composure, or actually piss me off, the thought never even entered my head to want to throttle her. They asked me endless questions, though, about my incredibly dysfunctional family, which quickly became annoying since not much of what they wanted to know even seemed relevant to the matter at hand. But they did have the grace to stop short of suggesting I might have killed Rebecca myself. A very neat cinema-shaped alibi plugs that particular hole in their investigative process, and the CCTV set up outside the place offers no evidence of me furtively sneaking out of the movie and coming back an hour or so later. So I haven't made it onto the list of suspects, and they seem a bit disappointed about that. It's not a cut-and-dried, family feud-based crime involving me then, unfortunately for them. It means they have a bit more work to do. While a surprising number of murders are familial, sadly Rebecca's isn't one of them, or so it seems, since I do believe my father is too feeble of that particular kind of spirit, and my mother's too miserly with her energy to use it to strangle someone. In any case, if they had the choice and the resources, I'm the one they'd have chosen to choke. Rebel Ruth, the daughter who wouldn't conform, always bunking off church, disappointing the family in too many ways to count. I was the black sheep who brought irrevocable mortification to the fine, upstanding vicar and his mild-mannered wife, and their other poor daughter Rebecca, the erstwhile, now God golden child, who couldn't put a foot wrong until she went and got herself killed. If Rebecca had been the one to run off and undertake the abomination of a marriage to another woman, I'm sure they'd have found a way to forgive her. But it was me who committed that unpalatable sin, and since tolerance for me has never been in strong supply, forgiveness was never going to raise its head above the still, stagnant water of the frigid family pond. So much for Christian values, Vicar. Loving thy neighbour, the acceptance and prayer for redemption of all the human flaws and frailties. I might be a lot of things, but I've never been a hypocrite like you. I've been with my wife Gina for nearly 20 years, but sadly it doesn't seem to matter that I'm happy. It doesn't seem to matter at all that she fulfills me in a way I once never thought I'd be. It doesn't seem to matter that we've made a happy home, that we're raising a beautiful, happy child, that we support one another's careers, that we have wonderful, enriching circles of friends, both gay and straight. None of that matters, even though it's what parents are supposed to want for their kids. If I had all that with a man by my side, I would probably be closer to acceptable. Because I have it with Gina, I'm persona non grata to my prudish parents who flatly refuse to acknowledge me anymore. And Rebecca torments me with monotonous regularity, presumably out of some sort of misguided sexual fear. At least she used to. She won't be tormenting me anymore, will she? Being dead and all that. Don't get me wrong. I'm sad beyond belief that my little sister is dead, and I'm utterly shocked at her murder. But I have to be honest. Rebecca was always mean to me and my own little family to the point of being cruel. I still loved her in spite of all that, but as much as I wish she wasn't dead, a tiny, traitorous part of me is glad she can't hurl insults at me anymore. On being informed of her death, even the tragic, outrageous, and scarcely believable circumstances surrounding it were not enough to prevent a small spark of relief from flaring inside me briefly, before the magnitude of what happened sank in and heartbreak took its place. And there is, still, the tiniest vestige of hope that this unspeakable event might draw what's left of my fragmented family of origin back together, that perhaps we might somehow be reunited by the appalling tragedy that's ripped us all in half. Time will tell, of course, but in truth I'm not holding my breath. My parents probably now just see themselves as childless. Our friends have always struggled to say the right thing in response to the rejection I've always had from my family. Everyone who truly cares wants to try and make it hurt a little less, usually falling on that inevitable, time-worn statement about it being the family's loss. But what they fail to understand is it's not just their loss, it's mine too. It's my loss too, and I feel it every day. But if I say that, it leaves people literally lost for words. They go all flummoxed and fidgety, they lose the ability to speak, and that much discomfort is more than I can bear to be responsible for. So I never say it to anyone, except Gina. She gets it. She gets me. As I've told the detectives repeatedly, I don't know much at all about my sister's adult life. I knew everything there was to know about her when we were little, growing up, dreaming of white weddings, but not the husbands, at least not in my case, and theorising about how many kids, cats and dogs we'd have and what our place in the world would one day be. We shared everything in the early years, before sexuality became first the wonder, then the wedge between us. Nowadays, after years of growing apart in entirely different directions and with entirely different destinations in mind, all I can tell them about Rebecca is that she evolved into a tortured soul. As a grown-up, she has always struggled and failed to find peace, and I don't know why. So I can't be of much help, but the detectives have a few leads. They're chasing down some boyfriend, apparently, a bloke she blew off recently after reaching her usual low threshold of boredom or dissatisfaction, or both. Rebecca has a short attention span and an even shorter fuse. She quickly gets fed up. She never hesitates to say so. Most times when her latent prima donna makes an appearance, people who know her well simply shrug their shoulders, walk away from her, and come back when she's cooled down a bit. But I could see how an ex might get upset at being tossed aside when his amusement value had faded. I could see how a man prone to volatility or outrage might suffer from wounded pride and lose his temper with her when she decides she's had enough and seeks to chuck him in the bin without a backward glance. But I have to stop thinking about her in the present tense, don't I? I have to remember that while I was simply sitting in a cinema, holding hands with the love of my life, chomping on popcorn and blissfully unaware, a massive part of my present simply slid by and turned into my past. The funeral is tomorrow, and I'm under no illusions. It will be horrible. It's taken a long time to get Rebecca's body released. Typical, I believe, where there's been a murder. They need to make sure that every last vestige of medical and forensic evidence has been meticulously scraped from her and identified and recorded. They don't want to miss anything, and that's entirely as it should be, but the wait has been interminable. All I've wanted to do is lay her to rest. Maybe I'll never know why she rang me on the night she was killed, and whether or not I could have prevented it from happening if I'd answered or rung her back. I have to find a way to live with that, and I guess I'll eventually figure out how to do it. Gina took the cringingly apologetic call from my father's put-upon secretary, requesting that I not attend my sister's funeral, that I spare the family any further anguish at this difficult time. But Gina put the poor woman straight, as only Gina can. My lovely, animated, effervescent, voluble, gorgeous Italian wife, who feels and communicates things like only true Italians can, told her in no uncertain terms to scuttle back to my father and tell him, "Tu dove il sole non splende," because I would be there. We would both be there, audaciously and abominably in flagrante as a lesbian couple, and any further anguish the family might feel over and above that of having to say farewell to a murdered daughter would be of their own creation if they chose to make an ugly scene involving the one that remained. Like all behaviour, Gina patiently explained into the telephone in the most beautiful Italian accent, being embarrassed, resentful, or small-minded is always an active choice. My parents had a choice. Gina is prepared to do battle. Personally, I'm just expecting to be ignored. No more, no less. Given the magnitude and horror of the occasion, I doubt if my parents would want to add to it by openly drawing attention to the family rift. They will, in all likelihood, simply choose to pretend I'm not there. I can cope with that. Gina can too, although whether she actually will is another story. She's a lot less adept than I am at hiding her true feelings. Gina wears her heart on her sleeve, and believe me, it's a very full heart. She is passionate, honest to a cringing fault, and remarkably intolerant of stupidity or ignorance. She is fiercely loyal, especially to me, and although she appreciates the need for restraint tomorrow, it will be interesting to see her reaction to being treated as invisible. She is typically anything but. You can't forget Gina once you've met her, and maybe that's the problem. It would be a lot easier to ignore what you might class as a repulsive relationship, unquote, if one of the parties involved wasn't larger than life and insanely beautiful to boot. Someone like Gina leaves a brand mark on your brain. She is fascinating to most men, and many struggle with the concept that one so beautiful, such an object of desire for them, does not in fact want them. Our equally beautiful daughter, Chiara, is the product of a misguided attempt 6 years ago by a friend of one of Gina's brothers to cure her of being gay. It happened on a weekend when Gina had gone home to Italy to visit her family. She got a lot more than she planned for that weekend, and I call it what it was, a rape. Gina is more forgiving, however, having made the bargain with the man in question that she wouldn't drag his name through the mud and bring disgrace to his fine upstanding Italian family if he relinquished all rights to the child. She quietly pointed out to him that everyone who was anyone in their local community knew her sexual status and would cheerfully stand up in court to say so. She also suggested that the prospect of opening the door to her 4 Italian baying for blood brothers was probably something he should be at pains to avoid, if he wanted his shameful tackle to remain attached. Few men with an ounce of common sense would want to go through any of that, and, entirely predictably, that man, I'd have called him something a lot less flattering, but that's just me, well, he picked up a pen and signed away his child with lightning speed. Self-preservation is a powerful thing, and Gina knew it. She looks on the bright side of the violation because despite the circumstances, Chiara is of course a truly beautiful gift, and I've got to grips now with the acceptance of how she came to us. She is as much mine as Gina's. We have the paperwork to say so, and we named her together. Chiara means light in Italian, and this beloved, beautiful, cherished child was the light that came out of a dark act. So it was a fitting name as well as a beautiful one. It's someone sweetens the bitter pill of my beloved being raped by someone she once grew up with, someone she'd once liked and trusted. Do my parents know they have an adopted grandchild? Yes, they do. Are they interested? Not in the slightest. While I wouldn't want to second guess them, because we've never even had the conversation, I'm assuming the presence of Chiara just adds to their total confusion about the mechanics of a relationship between 2 women who don't fancy men, yet one gets pregnant anyway and both go on to raise the child. Even as a vicar, my father knows that an immaculate conception is a bit too much of a stretch, especially for one so evil and corruptive as Gina Giordano. Apparently it's her fault that I have surrendered to the devil-driven darkness within me and let it take hold. Chiara will not be coming with us tomorrow. It is completely inappropriate to put our adorable, gentle child through the ghastly, traumatic funeral of someone who wouldn't even acknowledge her existence. Having her there is also too much of an in-your-face statement for my parents to have to deal with on what will already be the most miserable day of their lives. And I do still respect them that far. It's not my intention to cause a scene. All I want is to be permitted to pay my last respects to my departed sister, because despite the turbulent, fraught, and frustrating relationship we ended up having, if you could even call it one, I loved her with every last piece of my broken heart. The detectives will be there, of course. Apparently it's standard practice where there's been a murder but no conviction at the time of the victim's funeral. It's surprisingly common for perpetrators to attend the funerals of their victims, or so I'm told. Sick perversion, getting off on the misery and anguish they've caused, or sometimes even just to reassure themselves that they're not under suspicion. Go figure. So the police show up and generally just observe everyone in the act of grieving, just in case there's someone present for whom it really might be just an act. I wonder how many funerals they end up at for people they don't know, and I wonder how many crocodile tears they witness. I want my sister's murderer found and brought to justice. It's what my parents want too, but even with that, the common ground of grief and loss at either end of the Great Divide is not a solid enough foundation on which to build a bridge. They don't want me at the funeral. There is no olive tree with a branch to be extended, at least not from that side of the gulf. I have a field full of olive trees growing gently in my own heart, and I would give every last one of them up for peace and truce, but it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. As much as Rebecca persecuted me, she loved me too, I'm sure of that. The opposite of love isn't the hatred she tried so hard to hurl at me. The opposite of love is indifference, and I could never accuse her of that. Rebecca was never ambivalent about me. It was either blind love or blind hate with her, and turned on their head they are both more or less the same emotion. Caring beyond reason, railing against what the mind cannot accept, fighting like a dog to protect yourself from being wounded by what you can't understand. But Rebecca's love had limits. It's how she was made. It's like going down a road expecting to end up somewhere but finding a blunt dead end. No thoroughfare. She can't transcend her prejudices to love without limits. Or couldn't. Past tense, remember. So while I could accept Rebecca, with all her short ends and jagged edges, she could no more accept me than she could cease to breathe. Except that she did in the end, didn't she? She did cease to breathe, and in the worst possible way. My poor tormented sister was actively prevented from breathing by some monstrous person who failed to appreciate all she had to live for, all she had to fix, all she could one day have been, experienced, and done with her life. It is intolerable. The grief is like a billiard ball hard in the back of my throat with another sitting solid in my gut, and I don't know if they'll ever go away. Maybe one day I'll get to a place where I can think of her and all we have lost, all we could have had but didn't, without feeling those hard lumps lodged inside me. Maybe when they catch her killer I may get a chance. But maybe not. Maybe what doesn't get said, what doesn't get fixed in life, maybe it never goes away in death either. Maybe our unresolved issues, mine and Rebecca's, will just hang here, silent in the ether, stalking me from the shadows, shrouding me until my own dying day. And then what? Is there an afterlife, a place where we can meet as little lights or sparks to effect a workable truce? Or is this it, what we have now, forevermore? Most people expect me to have, as the daughter of a vicar, a belief system that can provide solace and reassurance at times like this, drawing strength from God and all that, and all the while remembering, as we're repeatedly told, that this God tends to work in mysterious ways. Well, they might be surprised to learn that I have no truck with any kind of God who can produce and tolerate a bigot for a mouthpiece. And let's not forget the small matter of families being randomly and sometimes repeatedly robbed of loved ones through war, genocide, or other types of death or family feud, with us all being expected to simply accept that it's all part of some higher, divine plan designed to make us better people. I don't know what that is, and good luck to the people who believe it, but I'm not one of them. Gina, the staunch Italian Catholic who has never once challenged my lack of faith or forced her own upon me, has sorted out our funeral clothes. Bless her, I'm still too numb myself to think about what Rebecca might have approved of or what my parents are likely to think. Gina is inherently stylish, it's part of her Italianness, and she's a very famous clothing designer, so there's really no excuse for getting it wrong. Not that she would. Panache is in her DNA, this talented, wonderful woman who, as a wedding gift, presented me with the most stunning surprise imaginable. A breathtakingly beautiful capsule wardrobe of clothes she had made herself, especially for me. One-off pieces in incredible styles, fabrics and colours that would never be replicated for anyone else. Gina always knows what to wear, so she has organised everything for us both. For me, it's a heavy silk black Giordano suit, a unique design just for me skirt and jacket, beautifully tailored and timeless, but functional too. It's the kind of thing you could wear to work, to a wedding, to a party, or to a funeral, depending on the accessories you choose to put with it. Tomorrow it'll be an understated soft pink cashmere camisole and a single strand of pearls. Black shoes, of course. I've always thought it disrespectful to wear any other colour at a funeral. Gina will wear her slate grey trouser suit with a dark blue satin shirt and no jewellery. Even at that, my darling's stunning olive-skinned wife with her slow eyes and her glorious waist-length waterfall of springy raven curls won't be able to avoid drawing attention to herself. She looks like the Romney gypsy of everyone's dreams. Even straight women would roll in the hay with Gina. Many of them have said so. It's just the way it is. There's never been a single day in the last 2 decades I have known her when I haven't pinched myself at the fact that she chose me. I'm starting to feel a bit sorry for the poor detectives. They have to repeat everything they say twice, once to my parents and once to me, and that must be tremendously annoying for them. But over the days, as they develop more insight and gather more information, they've taken to running it by me first, before they let my parents know anything. I get to decide exactly what gets communicated and how to Mum and Dad. Without them realising it, I get the chance to protect them a little, which I think is for the best. I get a sense that the police have already learned there are certain things my parents will take well and certain things they'll struggle with. For example, Rebecca's pathology and toxicology reports showing high levels of alcohol and cocaine in her system. In addition, and even less comfortably for the family, there was evidence of 4 different strains of sperm located in various places in Rebecca's body. all deposited at around the same time. So she was either gang raped or she had quite a party with a few male friends. In the absence of any evidence of struggle, it looks more like the latter, and that's not the kind of thing my narrow-minded, straight-laced, prudish parents who adored their faultless golden girl could comfortably hear or think about. Learning these things about her would be too much for them. It's really hard for me, as broad-minded and worldly as I think I am, to hear something like that about someone I love, regardless of our estrangement. For the detectives, that kind of information makes an investigation a lot more complicated. It substantially widens their field of inquiry and creates a lot of extra work for the investigative team. It's a frustration they have to manage, and as time goes by, I'm not sure how well they'll be able to keep absorbing it. They're already noticeably fed up. For me, though, this onslaught of appalling and distressing detail has a much bigger impact. It creates complete and utter turmoil, like a cyclone starting up and gaining strength in my brain. I know so little about Rebecca's adult life, yet I'm struggling hard with the notion that she'd take any kind of illegal drug, or that she'd have sex with at least 4 men at once. It makes me desperately sad, because even if she was a willing participant, it's the kind of scenario I just can't imagine anyone being truly happy in, no matter what might be going on in their lives. It's shocking, and it's confusing too, because Rebecca always seemed like such a prude. She dumped countless boyfriends just because they wanted to sleep with her. It seemed like she was never ready, never comfortable with sex in any shape or form, although we never really talked about it. In those days before I met Gina, and my own uncertain future suddenly became reassuringly clear at the ripe old age of 18. All sex repulsed Rebecca, it seemed, and she apparently found the idea of 2 women together so intolerable she couldn't even be content to simply ignore me and my wife. She was so revolted by us, she actually made it her business to torment us at every turn. As reactions went, it was extreme, but I never dug into it in any detail. Rebecca wouldn't have allowed that, even if I'd tried. I just had to acknowledge her prejudice and try and find a way to let it wash over me. That would have been a lot easier if she'd simply kept away from us, but she didn't. She constantly harangued us with nasty phone calls, emails and texts, and the occasional belligerent public appearance that always left us feeling frustrated and embarrassed. Gina thinks Rebecca had other issues, that we were just the most convenient outlet for some other deep-seated, indefinable misery within her. I always rejected that idea, but now I'm not so sure I should have. Maybe Gina was right. Maybe there was more going on than we ever imagined, and maybe we were just the outlet. I simply assumed that Rebecca hated the way I'd chosen to live my life and felt the need to torment me about it, well fueled by my parents' disapproval. I never thought about the situation as being any more complicated than that. So then, in my ever-recurring process of licking the wounds inflicted by my sister, had I missed something significant about her, and could I have saved her if I'd known what it was? Rebecca's autopsy seems so incredible to me. The detectives do believe the sex to have been consensual. Pathology reports show that there were no wounds or marks anywhere on her body consistent with a sexual attack, and the event occurred around 24 hours before she was murdered. Equally weird was the fact that even her death was simple, almost as if that was consensual also. Again, there was no sign of a fight or even much of a tussle taking place. Her nose had bled profusely, but that was apparently a typical bodily response to strangulation. There was evidence of slightly deranged bedding, consistent with someone moving around a little, but nothing to suggest she had fought for her life. It had clearly been quick, whoever did it, and they were vicious with it. They'd snapped her neck. The police say the semen is a significant part of their investigation, but I haven't a clue how they follow that up. They said they will start by running the DNA from each of the strains through their existing database of criminals and see what comes up. If nothing does, I'd say they'll have a hard job ahead of them. But nothing about Rebecca's life was ever simple, so why would her death be?